Hello, welcome to our continuation of the reading Tales of the Soul's Conquest of Evil. Today we will delve into the so-called Four Romances of the Goddess. We will look at the first and second episodes, Involuntary Creation and Involuntary Marriage. Get ready, because here we're entering a very unique context. Although the stories up to this point had a sacred tone, what is being conveyed here is actually something much more sacred. Because it is a writing of a Hindu religious nature. They are interpreting a Purana, which narrates the creation of the universe, of the fundamental marriage between spirit and matter, and indeed, all the needs that the gods truly and voluntarily have to obey so that the manifestation occurs in the way it was necessary. So here we will see that our friend HEINRICH ZIMMER finally shines with his profound knowledge of India. Just as we saw in the Tao Te Ching, with Richard Wilhelm as a brilliant sinologist, now we will see the aspect of Zimmer as a brilliant scholar of Indian traditions. And here he will delve deeply into this in a very profound and beautiful way. I hope I can decode this in a way that's in a simple way, because this part of the book is definitely not simple. He is contemplating some of the reasons why the manifested universe is what it is. If you consider the title itself, The Four Romances of the goddess mentioned is the goddess Maya, who has various names. She is also called Kali, referred to as Aurora, and in other parts of the tradition, she is known as Durga. She is a singular goddess. This great goddess Maya, which necessarily arises at the moment the universe manifests. Imagine drawing on some other traditions to try to make this clearer for you. Imagine I have a cake here, it's one, it's just one. But so that you don't just see one cake, but 12 slices, I come with a knife and mark those 12 slices. I create lines that are not actually real, they're mere marks of a knife. A knife, the cake remains as one. But thanks to these lines, we sometimes see 8 slices or 10 slices and no longer just one cake. So it says that the universe before, the manifestation is one. It is the unity from which all things came and to which all things return. Hence the universe versus the one, revolving around the one. So this one manifests and then contracts again, bringing all creation back to itself. But for things to move from unity into multiplicity, they must have lines that divide them and make them appear as many, when in essence they remain as one. So this spreading out and creating all the elements that give the illusion of separateness will generate an experience, a level of consciousness, which is then all absorbed back into unity. In other words, unity is enriched by this experience, which its own consciousness had to create in order to overcome separateness and return home. Your consciousness scattered into countless pieces, which believe they are separate, when in truth they are one. So he will have to overcome selfishness, he will have to conquer the lack of empathy, he will have to defeat violence and aggression against others, he will have to learn to integrate everything, and recover unity within multiplicity. The one who does this is a wise person, going beyond the illusion of matter, beyond the realm of the goddess Maya. This goddess Maya is the one who draws the illusory lines, making the one appear as many. Basically, that's the gist of the story. We will see that in another lecture I have already given to you about The Voice of Silence, written by Helena Blavatsky. This book is based on a Tibetan book called The Book of the Golden Precepts. In this work, Helena Blavatsky explains that for Tibet, the greatest evil in the world is the heresy of separateness. We find ourselves deeply believing in this story that we are many and not just one. And it's very interesting that you will see within this Purana that will be discussed that in fact, the ultimate goal of all evolving beings is to overcome this illusion of separateness and regain the notion of the one without ceasing to be in the world and behaving as if all things exist in the way we see them. In other words, I think I'm here, the Purana is there, things are around me, but intimately, deeply, I am able to take an inner dive where I realize that all things are one. In other words, having your head in the sky of unity and your feet on the earth of multiplicity, and being able to reconcile these two worlds. This is called wisdom. That's what wisdom is. Wisdom is not merely a horizontal knowledge of earthly things. Wisdom is a vertical knowledge that connects heaven to earth. And this story that will be told by Zimmer is nothing more than showing how it all began. How even the creator gods had to live through this drama. Create multiplicity, be affected by the pains, by the woes of multiplicity. Multiplicity, to overcome it and show all beings in manifestation that this is possible. The gods not only empathize with the world's problems, they live them. They sacrifice themselves to experience all the woes of manifestation, to show that it is possible to overcome them. It is possible to be in the world without being entirely of the world. So this is a beautiful story, but it has its fair share of complexity. That many times I tell you, one thing that impresses me about Leonardo da Vinci is precisely the perception that allowed him to create a masterpiece with the Iona Lisa. He realizes that people reflect, they portray, in the studio where he worked, great painters like Verrocchio. They depicted a reality that didn't exist, things separated by lines. He looked and said, these lines only exist in people's minds. I'm looking at the world and I don't see any lines. Things are continuous. They simply blur and transform into others. And he had this ambition, which was very successful in the Iona Lisa, to create a technique that reproduced the way things are in the world, without lines. The Iona emerges from a background. She appears. She is not divided. She is like a differentiation from the background where she was. She condenses and then disappears back into that background. What he perceives there, through a deep exploration of the mysteries behind his work, is typical of Leonardo. Leonardo wasn't so concerned with competing with the painters of his time or proving himself. Many of his works remained unfinished. He wanted to dive into the mystery of what he was doing. And what he proposes there is sensational. It's as if he were saying, look, I'll pretend I'm seeing things as separate, but I've already realized they're not. So this enables Leonardo to be considered as a man who, in a certain way, already had his head in the clouds and his feet on the ground. He already had a vision of the illusion of Maya. He was no longer a slave, a lackey of Maya. He was already, in a certain way, his own master. He was already able to go beyond that menu of options it so generously offers to all the departed. This shows how the drama of departing from unity began, how Brahma creates the manifested universe. From the departure from unity to manifestation. I hope you enjoy it. The story is very interesting. The Purana I mentioned is the Socratic Purana. I don't know if this is easy to find in Portuguese. Probably not. Books of this kind are quite expensive. Sometimes we need to develop a certain skill to learn to read in another language, because certain Indian books are very hard to find around here. So this Kali Purana shows the creation from the perspective of this great mother of Maya, how she was born and how she rules. Once she is born, she even governs the fate of the gods who created her. And that's very interesting. So it was said that at a certain moment the Indian Trimurti, who are the three great gods of manifestation, Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, began their work of creating the manifested universe. To help you understand this better, let's go back a little to Plato's Timaeus. Plato says that when unity, the one, the point, wants to create a three-dimensional object, the first closed figure it can create, is a tetrahedron, a pyramid with a triangular base. So the one, when it wants to manifest in a three-dimensional universe, it necessarily creates the three. So imagine that there is a great creator god. In this case here, Vishnu Narayana, the great creator. When he decides to create the manifestation, he generates the three, the triangular base, who are Brahma, the creator, Vishnu, the sustainer, and Shiva, the destroyer, the renewer. He needs these three forces. And these three forces need to build a bridge with the manifestation. They need to unfold into a half that has its feet on the ground. Their heads are already in the heavens. To be able to create the ground, they need to develop within themselves feet that tread on the ground. In other words, they need to develop a material counterpart that allows them to act in this world. So Brahma, when he begins his work, which is the first, as he is the creator, it is said that he deeply concentrates within himself. He focuses on the supreme yoga, dives into that unfathomable abyss that is himself, and begins to bring beings into creation. For those familiar with the Kybalion, the Egyptian text, it's the principle of mentalism. The universe is mental. Sati then originates from the mind of Brahma. He deeply concentrates on this mystery within him, this divine mystery, and figures begin to emerge for creation. And it's interesting because he doesn't have a concrete prediction. This is very interesting, as Zimmer mentions. He doesn't control the universe in such a way that he knows what comes next. The universe is a mystery even to itself. He begins to draw to Iona the ingredients of creation, which are hidden within him. They are hidden even from his own consciousness. He doesn't know what it is. As the light comes, he himself becomes more aware. He begins to understand the mystery of manifestation, seeing the things that emerge from him and come to light. In principle, everything is a mystery to him as well, who is the creator. So he dives deeply into himself and creates, first of all, 10 sons born from the mind. These are the 10 who will become the masters of future Brahmins, the masters of future sages. Soon after, he creates 10 miniatures of himself, who are called the 10 lords of creatures, as if they were smaller duplicates of him, Brahma. In some way, these beings will have to govern and create all the creators, all the modifiers of history on earth. In other words, they are miniatures of Brahma to act throughout the ages. That's why they are called the Lords of Creatures. It's interesting that if you take another well-known Indian work, the Bhagavad Gita, there comes a certain moment when Krishna, playing the role of God himself, says, "Each time the world declines in virtue and justice, I come and make myself a man among men, bringing the same eternal message of love, wisdom, and so on." The fact is that Krishna is saying, I am a lord of creatures. I am a miniature in the case of Vishnu because Krishna was the so-called avatar of Vishnu, one of them. So here Brahma creates 10 miniatures of himself, understanding that the number 10 is a symbolic number. It represents the entire manifestation. It comes from unity and then returns to unity, because 1 plus 0 is 1 again. So the number 10, as Pythagoras mentioned in his Decad, is a symbolic number of all manifestation. It's as if he said, throughout the manifestation, I will need 10 replicas of myself to descend to the world and guide all those who wish to create. Throughout the ages, these miniatures will descend and guide the creators of the world. It's more or less what Vishnu does when he created Krishna. He guides the conservators of the world, 10 miniatures of himself. And Shiva guides the destroyers, the renewers of the world, the destroyers of old forms. So there is the possibility of having 10 miniatures of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. And this number 10 is symbolic, as if it represents their presence throughout history, encouraging those who create, those who conserve, and those who renew. So after he creates these first 10, who are the mind-born and the guides of creatures, the lords of creatures, he returns and dives within himself to see what should be born next in the order. Once again, with a certain unconsciousness, that's why it's said that one of the reasons for manifestation is precisely to expand the creator's consciousness. Because consciousness is born in contrast. When he manifests something, in truth, in that contrast, he realizes who he is. In this contrast between being and seeming, between the eternal and the perishable, he can perceive more of his attributes that are mirrored in this perishable. It seems complicated, but if you clear your mind of any other references and try to focus on these symbols without prejudice, you'll see that you don't need to convert to any Indian theology. But as a philosopher, you can learn psychological references about yourself, which are very interesting. Because Indian philosophy, when it refers to these classics, it's not simply talking about gods, it's talking about humanity. Because what happens in the whole happens in the part. Once again, as the Kybalion says in Egypt, what is above is below. It's the principle of correspondence. So he is going to create something else when he dives within himself. Deep within, he brought forth a being. When he opens his eyes to see what it was a truly beautiful woman. Beautiful and at the same time alluring, with all the artifices of feminine beauty, he calls her Aurora. This Aurora is, in fact, Maya, Kali, Durga, the Great Mother, the great feminine force, who will help the spiritual universe cast its shadow on the material plane. She is the mother of forms. She will give birth to all the shadows of the divine in the world. From her, that which is limitless will find boundaries. She will shape in the concrete world what was previously only in the spiritual plane, without form. So this first one that is born remains there. He dives deeply within himself to understand the meaning of that first woman created. But when he dives into himself, instead of finding that meaning, which he will only fully understand later on, he encounters another being that comes into manifestation. When he opens his eyes to see what it was a very handsome man, strong, with a bow and arrows, all adorned with flowers. He looks at this man and wonders, what could this be now? And this creation of his turns to him and asks, why was I born? Why did you create me? And he, in a very interesting way, turns to this being, and I find this phrase very philosophical, very beautiful, and says that creatures can only fulfill themselves by finding their purpose in the world, the necessity that brought them into the world. See how philosophical this is. Apply it to yourself. Creatures only have a chance to fulfill themselves by finding their purpose in the world, what they can bring to the world, what value they can add. Here they came. What was the world's need that brought her here? What did she come to contribute? What value did she come to add? He then dives, Brahma, once again, dives into himself and realizes that this being was nothing more than the one who would generate love, desire, the attraction between the beings of earth. He then names him Kama, the Lord of Desires. And he is born right after Aurora or Kali is born. See how interesting this is. Because you'll see that in Greek mythology, Eros is conceived at the birth celebration of Aphrodite. The one who will be Aphrodite's squire, her loyal follower. And here too, Kama is born immediately after Kali, serving as her attendant, just as Eros always follows Aphrodite as her squire. The interesting thing is that soon this god of love, this Kama, the god of desire, will receive 2 assistants. And there will be 3 of them working. 3 and an additional group will follow them, working to generate this impulse of live's attraction, this loving impulse of attraction, which will cause the universe to create, Socratic, to preserve itself, to sustain itself, to renew itself. In other words, without this impulse, the universe would remain stagnant. He will generate within him the desire, one body for another, duality seeking reconciliation and reproducing from that, and generating new dualities that will seek reconciliation, and thus time will be born, the unfolding of the universe's drama from it. If you take an ancient sage named Hesiod, it's the exact same thing. We're talking about Greece. It's another world, another era. But there must be some truth to it, because these things are very similar. Hesiod says that when the universe divides for the first time because it was one, it becomes 2 when it splits into spirit and matter. It is precisely when Brahma creates the dawn. When it divides, the first god that is born is Eros, the ancient one, which is precisely this impulse of love. He says that Eros, the ancient one, has a function to move the universe, to recover the lost unity through the search for its opposite pole. It is said that all beings, without being fully aware of it, are deep down seeking to return to the unity they once had and lost. So they're always searching for that missing half somewhere in the other to try to reassemble that primordial unity. And this attraction to this so-called soulmate, this part of oneself that one seeks to rediscover in the world, moves the universe and generates creation. It's the entry into time. Then things start to chase after one another. It is the first impulse that will then generate time. So this Eros is born, this Kama is born following all these traditions. Brahma explains to him what his role will be. Your role will be eternally shoot arrows to make beings attract each other, and no one is beyond your power. Look how interesting. Brahma turns to him and says, neither I, nor Vishnu, nor Shiva will be spared from your power, nor will any divine being in the universe be spared from your power. Your power will be above everything and everyone. This is quite interesting, and Zimmer values this because Brahma has no personal interest. He expresses the laws of the universe. He has no interest nor fear that a being created by him might become more powerful than him or surpass him in any way. He is merely an expression of the laws of the universe. Without interests, without selfishness, he is a pure expression of Brahma. There is no restriction of truth in him for personal interest, because a being of Brahma's level has not yet come to understand what is truly his own he. And the whole are one and the same. He has not yet grasped the mentality of separateness. Well, that's how he says it to Kama, his young Eros. Kama becomes invisible and decides to experiment. The first thing he does is shoot arrows at everyone he sees around him, whether it's Brahma himself, his 20 sons, or Aurora herself who are there. Everyone gets struck by an arrow, and suddenly he says that the first love story of the universe begins, because those purest gods and Brahma himself begin to burn with desire for Aurora, and they sweat, they perspire. It's a wild thing, a desperation to contain their impulses. It is said that Shiva, who lived immersed in deep meditation, was the supreme Asita, the king of the Yoginis. He awakens and goes there to see it. What is this? And he turns to Brahma and says, what nonsense, Brahma! Was it you who dictated the verses of the Vedas? The Vedas forbid a father from feeling attraction to his daughter, this being you created as your daughter. How can you do this? What a contradiction! What an absurdity! That reprimand he gives to Brahma splits Brahma's mind. At the same time that he continues to feel this burning desire inspired by Kama within him, he regains the consciousness of unity. And he becomes deeply ashamed of having been humiliated like that in front of Shiva, of having fallen into the traps of a being he himself created. And that sudden fury makes him turn to Kama and say, cursed you shall be, when you try to shoot Shiva, you will be struck down by the central he possesses. Then his son, the god of love, Kama, turns to him and says, look, that's not fair, father. You were the one who created me and told me I had power over everyone. I want to exercise this power and I was punished? I don't understand. Then Brahma recovers, regains his consciousness, and realizes that he had indeed been unjust. He says, the day Shiva is struck by an arrow, you will die for a moment and be reborn as soon as he experiences his first passion. In other words, it was destined that even Shiva, the greatest of all ascetics, would one day experience his passion. And all the beings present there, all the Brahmins, the masters, the gods, who had been created by Brahma, who were the mind-born lords and the lords of creatures, all of them burning with passion as well, began to perspire. And from that perspiration, beings were born. It is said that the eldest of the lords of creatures, who is Daksha, a monk, a god who would be very useful, a Brahma, he begins to perspire, and from his perspiration a beautiful woman is born. Golden, perfect. And from the perspiration of the others, the souls of the deceased, the souls of the disembodied, begin to emerge. In other words, from the control of their desires, from being able to restrain their impulses from this effort, they bring back to life the memory of all those beings who once were, because they are the seeds of those beings who will be. In other words, the central fuel, the seed, which is the essence of all beings that have ever existed, is already there. And once the bodies are created, they will inhabit those bodies. They are brought to Iona at this moment. And this girl who is born from Daksha's sweat is given as a wife to the god of love, Kama. She becomes his first counterpart. An interesting thing worth noting is that when Kama is born, he is born with his bow and arrows full of flowers, but he also has a banner with fish on it. This is all quite fascinating, folks, because this is Greek mythology. Of course, there is a very strong possibility that all these traditions migrated from India to all these mythologies that we know closer to the West. There was definitely a very direct influence. We all know, for example, that Hercules is the Hindu Brahma, brother of Krishna. There was a very direct influence from the mythologies. But the fact is that we know when the Titans invaded Olympus, Aphrodite and Eros fled transformed into fish. So much so that the symbol of the Pisces sign is a tribute to these fish. In one version, they say they transformed into fish, and others say that 2 fish saved them. So the symbol of the Pisces sign, those 2 little fish, would have been a tribute from Aphrodite and Eros to those 2 fish that saved their lives. In other words, for some mythical reason, this force of love, the driving force of life, is represented by a fish both in India and later in Greece and Rome, consequently. Another interesting thing, I've already talked to you about the Erodes. From the moment Daksha's daughter is born, who is Sati, the lady of desire, and soon after, another god is created, Spring, a male god who is capable of creating an aroma, a favorable wind, an environment conducive for love to manifest. The Erodes in Greece were also 3 who were part of Eros' entourage to create the right conditions for love to manifest. And there are many coincidences like that. I don't believe these are coincidences. In this case, probably one tradition paying tribute to the other. We know about the influence of Indo-European even in language. Proto-Indo-European is at the root of most European languages. At this moment, Seymour pauses to explain the structure of the universe up to this point. It's interesting that we follow along and reflect together, so that we can absorb something from this great mystery he is trying to reveal a small part of to us, which is the mystery of the logic of the universe, the law, the framework of everything that exists, the law that is behind the manifestation being the way it is. So Zimmer will argue that creation is a continuous process. There is always deterioration. A form is created, a form deteriorates, then this form is dismantled, and it is reconstructed, and so the universe continues. Not only when our body is dismantled to reconstruct another, as we are within a tradition that is seeking wisdom, but also within our lives, the personality is sometimes completely dismantled. And then when we think we're going to die, an unexpected process comes along, as he calls it, that redeems us and rebuilds us, but on a completely different level. If we trust the flow of life, we don't drift aimlessly. We accept death. We coexist well with it. We accept the death of a certain arrangement of our personality. We allow it to be destroyed, to be left behind, without much drama, and this unexpected factor always comes along. It introduces into our lives something that was absolutely unexpected, allowing us to rebuild ourselves on another level. So what he is presenting here is that according to the Indian perspective, the laws of the universe unfold in this way for one reason only, to push consciousness upward. If it weren't this way, no one would convince beings to grow. And to grow is to return once again towards the realm of Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva, to the realm of unity, to the spiritual realm from which we departed. We have to be pushed back home. So it's like imagining someone who designed the ocean so that the surfer's board could ride the wave up and then come down. Someone conceived the laws of the universe so that human consciousness could ride this wave. then descend and reach an even higher wave, until it surpasses the sea itself, surpasses the manifestation. Remember that water, horizontality, the sea, is always related to matter, to manifestation. It's quite interesting to think in this way. He says, the universe leaps from disaster to disaster. And this disaster is a necessity which dismantles a certain configuration of the universe to build another closer to the ideal, closer to your divine origin. Therefore, it really has to be dismantled. And the man who absolutely trusts in this, understands and sees the law, and absolutely trusts in it, he doesn't dramatize. He surrenders to this process. And he allows himself to be carried forward without so much pain. You'll see that in various mythologies, like the Greek one, at a certain moment, when a priest of Aphrodite is struck hard, in one of the myths, he says the goddess didn't want me the way I was. But he never rebels against the goddess. You do not see within Greek mythology at any time a being, a priest of a certain god, who considers the adversity as injustice or something random, but simply the goddess or the god didn't want me this way, and they push me upwards. And let's see what emerges. They broke my logic that was leading me there, because that's not where I was meant to be. This level of trust that we no longer have makes it so that when life comes and breaks a certain structure of our personality, we feel persecuted, wronged, and become engulfed in disproportionate pain, because we are not capable of understanding the purpose of life. Sometimes we don't even believe it exists. And this is very, very profound what's being presented here. Pause for a moment and reflect on this. That's why I told you, we are talking about the belief structure of a religion. We are talking about a structure that has its powerful psychological key, and it can help us understand a lot about life. Well, another thing that's fundamental to understand. There is a need for all divine beings to have their feminine counterpart. Its feminine counterpart means its same spirit, now within life. Within the material world, producing fruits in the material world. A god without his feminine counterpart would be sterile. Remember the principle of gender from the Egyptian Kybalion. Masculine and feminine, the conjunction of opposites is fertile, it bears fruit. So a god without his feminine counterpart is sterile. He is incapable of acting in the world. So all these goddesses, they are not actually different from God. They are neither inferior nor superior. They are a unity that, at a certain moment, the veil of Maya passed through and made this unity appear as two. The god and the goddess, his sati, his complement, his way of acting in the world, his bridge to produce fruits, to generate offspring in the concrete world. Otherwise, God would be ineffective, sterile, and incapable of acting in the world. So, initially, Brahma takes a counterpart, who is Sati. We'll see that Vishnu also already had his counterpart, who is Lakshmi. And then Brahma starts to get worried because Shiva didn't have a counterpart. And the universe needed Shiva's role. He said, look, many dark forces that work towards dissolution, that work towards resistance, will interpose themselves. Some, I myself as a creator, can destroy them. Some Shiva can certainly destroy them. Some Maya can truly destroy, but no one like Shiva to eliminate all those elements that interfere. Vishnu, and I can do little compared to the power of Shiva, whose main attribute is being the renewer. Therefore, he can eliminate the shadows that are harmful to the advancement of the universe. Now, if he remains withdrawn in his asceticism, distant from the world, the only thing he can do is asceticism. He can't do anything for the world. He needs to be drawn out of this deep dive into himself to act in the world. And for that, he needs to have a goddess, he needs to have a sati. And he becomes worried about this, immersed in these concerns, thinking about how to find the one who will be the perfect wife for Shiva. First, he seeks out Kama, the god of love, explains the necessity, and Kama becomes concerned because he says, for my arrows to pierce Shiva, there needs to be a crack through which the arrow can penetrate. But we surround him with images, with fantasies, with everything, and he sees nothing. He ignores all of this, completely immersed in himself. How are we going to bring him to Iona? So that there might be some opening where my arrows can enter. Then Brahma says, well, I will find a woman who will be perfect for him, who will be able to bring him to Iona, so that you can strike him with your arrows. He dives once more into himself, Brahma, and searches within, but doesn't find it within himself. This woman is already manifested. He remembers, it's Aurora, it's Maya, it's Kali. She has to create this feminine element, this female counterpart, that can draw Shiva out of himself, which is no easy task. Shiva is the most stubborn of yogis, of ascetics, a solitary ascetic. He refused to come out of himself. He then goes and speaks with his son Daksha. One of the lords of creation says, look, we need to call upon Kali, explain to her the necessity of creating a woman for Shiva. Daksha agrees with this, understands the necessity, and both of them dive into deep meditation, making sacrifices, offering gifts, both Brahma and his son, making offerings so that Kali, Maya, or Aurora, as they preferred to call her, would come to them. It's interesting because the notion of time within these eras is completely different. It is said that they spend several tens of thousands of years doing this, making offerings and focusing their minds on Kali, until at a certain moment she comes. She comes first to Brahma. She appears to him, and he explains to her. In the same way that you dove and brought from the world, from creation, a shadow of yourself, which was my counterpart Sati. You dove into creation and brought forth a shadow of yourself, which is Lakshmi. Now it is necessary for you to dive once more into creation, to be born as the daughter of Daksha, to be able to give a wife to Shiva. Shiva needs to marry a woman. Shiva needs to assume his role in the development of the universe. And Kali says, of course, no one else could do this. It is through me that the generation perpetuates. I am the mother of life. No one else could do this. But look, even for me, Shiva is a tough case. But I will do it, and I will succeed. I will be born as the daughter of Daksha, and this daughter will be Shiva's wife. And so, speaking, she appears to Daksha himself, who is also making sacrifices, to call upon the goddess and to ask her for a favor. She appears to Daksha, and Daksha makes the request, and she says, I know, and I will grant your request because it is a necessity. Your request is the request of your father, Brahma. Therefore, make the marriage happen, and from this woman a girl will be born. From an early age, she must be instructed in the worship of Shiva, as she is destined to be his wife in the future. Well, and so it was done. Daksha will take a woman in marriage, and from her, his daughter Sati will be born, who is none other than Maya herself, Kali herself, reborn in the flesh as the worthy wife of Shiva. It's interesting how Shaun talks about this relationship, where this divine aspect ascends to the heavens, marries the divine ideals, and comes to earth to give birth to the children of these ideals. These children will increasingly strive for perfection, in other words, evolve. Chase after recognizing their father, align with the divine plan. But this dialogue, this weaving between heaven and earth, the one who generates life, the great mother, this is the role of the feminine. To bring these eternal, divine ideals to the world, to continue life, to give momentum so that all beings may evolve. He even mentions, which I found very interesting, a passage from a very well-known opera that I really like, which is Verdi's La Traviata. A key part of Simmer Libera, which says the following: love is the heartbeat of the entire universe. Mysterious, sublime, torment, and delight for the heart. He recalls this passage, so well crafted by Verdi, and highlights this drive of love, this power of love, which generates time, creates space, expands creation, and provides conditions for multiplicity. And at the same time, the call of the Father, the call of the Spirit, brings all of this back. It's the great cycle of the universe. There's a detail in the story, small but still important, that says when Brahma approaches the god of love, Kama, to ask him to shoot Shiva with his arrow, Kama says, "Look, Shiva is impossible. I've tried everything. He doesn't come out of himself." It is said that Brahma had a moment of discouragement where he truly doubted and said, "Yeah, maybe we won't be able to attract Shiva too." From this moment of Brahma's discouragement, a multitude of strange forms were born, bodies mixed with various animals, various monsters, a host of terrifying beings. And then it says that Kama turns to him and asks, "And now, Father, what are these ones good for?" And it is said that they constantly chanted, "Kill, kill, kill, kill." Since they were born saying this, they will be the lords of death. They will be your entourage. To care for them, to guide them, and they will be useful to creation in the following way. Every time someone tries to resist the charms of seduction, every time someone seeks enlightenment, they will be the force of resistance. Because only by overcoming resistance does one gain merit. So all these beings fight against the necessary upward impulse of nature. From generating resistance and overcoming that resistance, merit is born. A vast amount of details, these are the necessities of the manifested universe, which even Brahma himself does not know at the beginning. And he discovers as the universe unfolds, and these needs emerge from within him. And once again, Zimmer comments on this. Brahma doesn't have the concern of wanting to be very omnipotent, very powerful. He is a pure being completely obedient to Brahma, who is learning from the forces that emerge from within himself. He is, in a way, getting to know himself by bringing forth the ingredients of the universe from within. And once again, it's something that perfectly serves the principle of correspondence. We get to know ourselves when we focus on bringing out what makes our lives move forward, the useful and necessary tools to fulfill our own Brahma. We are part of the life of the universe. We also contribute to this march back home. And within us, when we focus on this, elements begin to emerge that will become necessary tools for the progress of our lives. Just as it happened with Brahma, as it happened with the Creator, it will also occur throughout the evolution of each creature. Notice how beautiful and interesting this is. He is also the first to be surprised, Brahma, by the things that emerge from within him. Once again, what will befall creation is first experienced, tested, and overcome by the Creator, as if he were leading the way to show the path. This is a peculiarity of Indian mythology. Well, then, Daksha marries Varani. And from Varani, they have Sati. From a young age, Daksha recognizes her as already being a manifestation of Kali. She reveals herself to him and says, "I am here to fulfill our purpose." But for the mother, no, the mother sees in her just a simple baby. And from a young age, she is instructed to worship Shiva. She makes sacrifices, dedicates herself to the image, focuses on the image of Shiva, and makes constant offerings, already preparing for the union that will one day happen. After some time, when she becomes a splendid young woman, as was to be expected, Brahma decides to pay a visit along with Vishnu to Shiva. Upon arriving there, the two arrive with their respective wives. Brahma brings Sati, and Vishnu brings Lakshmi. And when the two couples arrive there, and Shiva is called to meet them, to be in their presence, there is a small crack in Shiva at that moment. He feels a moment of loneliness when he sees those two couples so perfect, so happy. He sees that Brahma and Vishnu are never alone, but he is. At that moment, Kama, the god of love, is already there watching, because he needs a moment of hesitation like this, to be able to pierce with his arrows. So this first doubt that arises in Shiva arises there. He feels loneliness when he sees those two couples. Brahma approaches him and speaks of the necessity for him to have a wife, because they needed him to collaborate with them in the universe. Brahma was creating, Vishnu was preserving, and he was not fulfilling his role because he wouldn't step out of himself, he wouldn't go into the world. He was devoted solely and exclusively to his asceticism, to the necessity of taking a wife. Until at some point, Shiva, somewhat hesitant, asks, "Who would be this worthy wife to marry me?" Then Brahma becomes very happy with his question and says, "She already exists. It is Sati, the daughter of Daksha." And he becomes curious about that, curious to know more. And Brahma says, "She already performs constant and fervent sacrifices, devotions directed towards you." And Shiva is somewhat impacted and curious to know who Sati was. Once again, Kama is keeping an eye out. Some cracks begin to appear. He already tells his wife, to his companion Spring, "Look, let's keep an eye out. Let's prepare for the arrow to be launched." After some time, not much, Shiva, curious, goes to the presence of Sati as she once again performs her devotional sacrifices to Shiva. When she lifts her head from the ground, she looks and sees that Shiva was physically present before her. It was no longer just an image, he was concretely there. She stands up very startled, very surprised, emotional, and Shiva said, "I liked your sacrifices. I came here to fulfill a request of yours. Ask." In this opening, the god of love already realizes that he actually wanted her to ask for marriage. And he takes advantage of the arrow and poof. The moment of Shiva's inattention, poof, he launches his two arrows, of desire and the fervor of passion. The young Sati feels a bit confused, a bit shy, unable to speak. And before she could voice her request, Shiva already says, "Caste on." She is surprised by this, even though it was what she desired most. He repeats, he was so inflamed with love that he repeats, "Caste on with me." She says, "It's necessary to speak with my father." He repeats, "Caste on," already intoxicated with love. And she bows and enters and goes towards her father. In this moment, Shiva withdraws, returning to his own world, but he can no longer immerse himself in meditation as he was burning with love for Sati. And quickly through the concentration of his mind, he calls upon Brahma and Sati. The two of them swiftly travel in their chariot of sacred geese. He arrived in his presence, and he was already burning with passion. He says, "I suffer the thirst and the burning of all the beings on earth. That god of love struck me hard. I need Sati." Brahma didn't think twice. He goes to Daksha and returns with him to arrange how it would be. And from there, Shiva returns with Brahma and Daksha, the father, heading towards Daksha's house to consummate the marriage. It's interesting because it is said that Shiva descends with all his yogi attire, dressed in a tiger skin, a serpent coiled around him, as is the traditional representation of Shiva, the crescent moon upon his hair, and a true procession of gods, beings of nature. Accompanying that wedding procession, he arrives at Daksha's house, and all the gods start arriving. Even Vishnu comes with his Lakshmi, and there the union of the two, him and Sati, is celebrated. And at a certain moment, Brahma, who is observing everything, pauses, gazing at Sati's face. Sati's face was magnetically beautiful, perfect. And he looks at her and starts to linger too long gazing at her face, and is overcome by some desire. This desire causes him to unleash a violent storm upon the world, forming very dark clouds. When Shiva realizes this, he becomes terribly jealous and wants to kill Brahma. Vishnu steps in between the two, saying, "How can you want to kill the creator? I don't need him. I can create another creator. I have all the powers within me." Visa says, "Have you forgotten that I, and hear the same thing?" And Shiva had forgotten that they were one. "What do you mean we are the same thing? He is there, I am here." It's necessary for Vishnu, in the role of the great Vishnu, to understand that there are two Vishnus, the one, Narayana, and the Vishnu of the triad, the Trimurti. In the role of the great Vishnu, Narayana Vishnu calls Shiva to return within himself, to dive deep inside and once again witness the entire spectacle of the universe's birth. Notice that for a few minutes, because it hadn't been long, Shiva had just come out of his meditation. He is entangled and snared in such a way by Maya that he thinks he can kill Brahma, who is a part of his own being, a piece of himself. He falls into the illusion of separateness and becomes completely entangled in the fantasies of the world. The gods must live the drama of humans first, ahead of them, to show that it is possible to overcome it. This is the great sacred offering, the divine sacrifice. In other words, he falls into the material world and forgets the spiritual realm from which he came. And he is rescued, turns inward, and allows the Lord of Unity to dive into him and reveal once again all the secrets of the universe. Then Shiva, for a few moments, breaks free from the bonds of Maya, escapes Maya's reach, and dives deep within himself, witnessing a profound darkness, which is Parabrahman, the beginning of the universe, where there was only a single unity shining there, the seed within the circumference. This small unit that was shining there in the middle, at a certain moment, develops and differentiates itself. The great divine spirit and the great seed of divine matter are generated, in other words, the seed of duality. And then he notices this duality expanding, that is, the birth of space. This seed begins to develop, meaning that time is born simultaneously, as this seed grows, becoming a cosmic egg. Time is born and space is born. Different situations start to unfold. One emerges from that initial paralysis, where there was only darkness and a single point. This point develops and becomes a cosmic egg. Now time and space have been born. Then begins the whole process of dualities separating, clashing, harmonizing again, returning to unity, moving apart, circling around each other, harmonizing, and returning to unity. He sees within that grand cosmic spectacle, within that stage that was opened in the midst of eternity. He sees deep down the seed of the divine, of the great creator. And he sees from within this pure, untouched creator, at the center of the egg, he sees it differentiating into Brahma, Vishnu, and Shiva. In other words, he returns to see himself, he returns to see reality, he returns to see his deep and mysterious identity and his role in the world. And at that moment, Vishnu brings him back. Then he emerges from this deep, internal vision. He returns to manifestation once more. Maya ensnares him. But Vishnu asks, "Did you see the reality?" "Yes, I saw. I remembered everything. I emerged from my illusion." "Well, now you're going to live in the world, return to the arms of Sati, but you'll need to keep these two worlds conscious and harmonized. Look at this beautiful thing, folks. What a wonderful thing. This is the pinnacle of life. Do not stop being in the world, fulfilling the needs of the world, but the actions in this world are guided by a consciousness of something beyond themselves. Head in the sky and feet on the ground. And the gods went first to show us that this is possible. So in light of this vision, Shiva, while living in the realm of Maya, also lives beyond it and is able to reconcile the two worlds, and is able to reconcile all the apparent contradictions of this world. He sees the unity behind the multiplicity. And this is the archetype of seeking wisdom. Remember that at a certain moment it is said, in Greek tradition, that Solon visited the Egyptians and the Egyptians told him, "You are gods, but you have forgotten. You Greeks will always be children." In other words, in a certain way, it's the same thing that Ravana says to Kama, "You have forgotten who you are." In other words, we have this world of unity accessible to us. But we get so caught up, so much in the material world, in the realm of Maya, that we forget this reality, which gives meaning to the world, which rescues the world from banality, from arbitrariness, and gives meaning to the experiences of the world. If you lose the mold, the reflection of the mold becomes a random shape. It no longer has any meaning. This is reflected, for example, in our loss of symbolic mentality. How can you think that something in this world is a symbol if you don't know what it can symbolize? If I don't know the object, it's very difficult to recognize it just by its shadow. Shadow of what? What is this object that is casting the shadow? At a certain point, you will have to move among the shadows, take them into account, but know the reality of the shadows, see through them. In other words, go beyond Maya so that it doesn't suffocate you. Simply let it serve you. Maya builds a staircase for you to return home. But if you don't understand the mysteries of Maya, this staircase can become a prison. So folks, this would be the synthesis or the central message of our reading today. Live with Maya without letting yourself be imprisoned by Maya. Think a little, reread. Reflect on this. We will continue with the last 2 chapters in our next meeting. Thank you.